A brain possessed, in which is shown that when cortical neurons fire strongly and synchronously, as during certain seizures, consciousness fades. In the broken light of the lanterns, Galileo could make out a narrow courtyard, surrounded by 3 or 4 rows of planks. The planks were creaking and shaking, crowded with shabbily dressed villagers, leaning out as far as they could and shouting in a language he did not understand. The shouting was waxing and waning unpredictably, as if conducted from high above. The women were holding babies in their arms. This land is plagued by seasons of foul weather, thought Galileo, and covered his ears with wool as gusts of wind blew. In the middle of the courtyard, a girl, she was maybe 16, was tightened to a wooden wheel, a rope around her neck and one around her waist. On one side her long hair was sinking into a filthy bucket. Galileo took hold of his telescope to see her better. A fat friar was busy over the girl, his face invisible behind the black hood. Next to the friar was a man who looked like a civil servant. He was reading aloud, it seemed, but his words could not be heard. Somebody was pulling at Galileo. 2 children with pinched, old-looking faces were holding him by his coat. He threatened to shake them off, but they would rather be beaten than let him go. With a sneer the children handed him a note, written by a firm and polished hand, but they would not let go of the note, and were tearing the paper apart. Galileo had to twist their wrists a full turn and with all his force, but their expressions revealed no pain. Then one, still sneering, said to the other, one of us, or so it sounded to Galileo. The note was signed by the most learned Dr. Helmstadt. It said the girl was epileptic, and hopefully she would be the one at last to prove the doctor's theory correct. The doctor's ideas were expressed in a roundabout manner. He seemed to claim that seizures were due not to any supernatural cause but to the vital spirits in the brain when they were active in excess. The villagers and boorish friars may well think her a witch, who during her convulsions had intercourse with the devil, but he knew better. I count religion but a childish toy, and told, "There is no sin but ignorance," the doctor had written. The fat friar was shouting in vulgar Latin, his head facing toward the sky. Now with the help of God he would obtain a confession. He sent away a woman who had crossed the court in a fury, a large pan in her hands. Yes, all the beans had rotted. It surely was the witch's doing, but there were graver charges. The civil servant began to turn the wheel slowly, as if to make sure that no screech would be missed. Now Galileo could hear him speak in good Latin. "A beautiful woman is like a gold ring in the nose of the sow," he said. He wore a hat turned up at the sides. The doctor, thought Galileo, must be the man who was approaching the girl from the rear with some tool in his hand. The girl could not be heard. The crowd was bellowing again. From behind, the doctor touched her head with his hand as if to reassure her that everything was as it should be, and gently stroked her hair as if to judge the quality of a precious fabric. Then delicately he probed her skin with the tool he had at hand. Clearly he was trying to cause no damage, but then suddenly he raised his hand up high, holding what now seemed like a large scalpel. In a few savage strokes he tore off a handful of hair, still attached to the bone underneath, and went around the opening, then seemed to wave to Galileo. With an oil lamp, the doctor threw light on the exposed surface of the brain and quickly whipped it clean with his own fingers. The brain was pale like a girl's skin. Galileo would have wanted to yell, but the din of the crowd made it hopeless to be heard, and he would have drawn attention to himself, which was unwise, as one never knows what an unruly mob might do. The 2 children too were an impediment. Without him realizing it, they had drawn him much closer. The doctor was talking to the girl and trying to calm her. The friar lifted his arms, and the crowd turned silent. Staring at the opening on her head, the doctor motioned to Galileo. A church bell rang, and through his telescope Galileo could see a sudden swelling of the brain. The doctor's eyes were beaming. He asked the girl whether she wanted to say her prayers. She wanted to, and when she did so, the swelling went up and then went down again. Praying made her brain flush, thought Galileo. The men were arguing. The doctor promised that it would not take much longer. The civil servant was impatient. Schlepfus, this was his name, had been appointed judge at his young age because of his good service, or so he said. His guiding principles were simple. Every sausage has two ends, and guilt is never to be doubted. He was glad to serve the interest of science. So far as science would remember, it must serve a higher interest. The doctor offered the girl something to drink, and she took the cup avidly. Suddenly she gave a shrill cry, and a moment later her limbs stiffened violently against the wheel. Her back arched against the ropes. The doctor was asking questions, was touching her here and there, but she would not respond. "She has lost consciousness," he said. "One sip has been enough to make her go," he said. "Just as I thought." Galileo looked at her face. Her lips had turned blue. Her eyes had rolled upward. Her teeth was gnashing. The girl now foamed at the mouth. The foam turned red, and her body began shaking wildly. The doctor's eyes were flashing. Under the lantern, the surface of the brain had been flooded with blood. Finally, he had obtained proof. The seizures were due to her brain swelling with excitement. The friar's teeth, too, were flashing under the black hood. He, too, had received proof. She was possessed. The devil was tossing her around, and then her body fell as a dead body falls, and snow was falling on her ashen skin. "In a little while she will recover," said the doctor, who was suddenly behind Galileo. He was a middle-sized man, wrapped in a black cape that closed at the throat with a little metal chain. His face still smooth, but his cheeks already flabby with age. "They think she has been seized by evil spirits, the uncouth rabble. Of course, there is no evil spirits. It's just the animal spirits, those that make her nerves quiver. The girl has too much sulfur in her brain, so her animal spirits burst into excessive discharges. That causes her body to stiffen and jerk." "What was it that you gave her to drink?" asked Galileo. "Camphor oil," answered the doctor with a smile. "She was epileptic, to be sure, but I had to make certain she would have her seizures at the right time." Galileo thought of the books Frick had given him. Seizures are indeed caused by excessive neural discharges. In his own way, the doctor had been right, yet Galileo could not dislike him more. The strong seizure the girl had suffered surely meant that most cells in the brain must have discharged together at high rates, quite unlike what happens normally, when only a few groups of nerve cells fire strongly and the rest is rather quiet. So consciousness can fade, not only if neurons are destroyed and cannot fire as with Copernicus. Consciousness also fades if all neurons fire at the same time. Somehow, if everybody shouts together, nobody can listen, thought Galileo. "The girl would have been wasted anyhow," intervened the doctor, as if he could read Galileo's mind. "Nothing I could have done. She might as well serve a proper cause." And himself, thought Galileo. Could he have done something himself? But then he thought, in this foul weather, in this foul land, how could one lend a helping hand? Notes. The discovery that changes in brain activity could be detected by observing changes in cerebral blood flow is due to Angelo Mosso, an Italian physiologist who, at the end of the 19th century, recorded the pulsation of the human cortex in patients with skull defects. As related by Marcus Rachel in Historical and Physiological Foundations of Modern Neuroimaging, Psychological Science, W. W. Norton, 2003, Mosso came to study a peasant by the name of Bertino, who had incurred an injury that left him with a permanent pulsating soft spot in his skull. One day, while Mosso was using some elaborate gadget to record these pulsations, the church bells rang noon, and he noticed a sudden increase in pulsations over the cortex. Mosso asked Bertino if he felt that he should have said his midday prayers, and he said yes, and up the pulsations went and then down again. So then, conducting what may have been the first cognitive activation experiment ever, he asked him to multiply 8 by 12. So Mosso poses the question, and then the pulsations go up and then down again. And then Bertino answers, and up and down they go again. And from this he concluded that changes in circulation of the brain were related to cognition. The use of camphor oil to induce seizures goes back to Paracelsus. This chapter, which plays out in some northern country during one of the many witch hunts, contains references to a story told by Mann in Dr. Faustus and to Kafka's The Trial. Galileo's final thoughts strangely echo those of Friedrich Rückert in Kindertotenlieder. In this weather, in this dread, I should never have sent the children out. They have carried them away. I dare not to say anything about it.